Explain like I'm 5. Why is Africa generally poor compared to the rest of the world? Africa has a lot of natural resources but has always relied on foreign aid. Nonetheless has famine, poor road network, poor healthcare etc. Please explain. Africa has the fewest good ports of any great landmass. Most trade has to be transferred to smaller boats to bring in, which is costly. They also have very few navigable rivers, making transportation within the continent difficult. Most rivers are either full of rapids or only usable in certain seasons. The continent also has diseases and pests which are anathema to most commonly domesticated animals. Edited for horrendous fat-fingered phone typing. Is there any response from an actual African born and bred in Africa here? Well, as a born and bred African in a well-to-do country in East Africa, why we are poor is because of 1. Corruption and looting by government officials. 2. Crazy debt. 3. Old and present-day colonialism. Corruption is a huge factor as well as the other good answers here. Lots of dictators and powerful people looking out for their own people. To add to several really good answers, malaria and other tropical diseases are definitely a factor in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Lack of navigable rivers and ports. Africa's coastline is short compared to its area and the Rift Valley cannot be navigated by boat. This contrasts with Europe, which has many large rivers that crisscross the continent and many inlets and natural ports. The Sahara Desert. The Egyptian civilization centered around the Nile and was blocked from cultural expansion into the continent by the lack of water away from that river. One potential factor that I don't see being told here was the relative lack of domesticated animals. Horses completely transformed the infrastructure of other continents. A zebra may look about the same as a horse, but they cannot be tamed. They will bite onto you and not let go. They kill more zookeepers than any other animal. Corruption and the partisan rivalries between ethnic groups. As an example, Nigeria has 371 ethnic groups. If you're interested in reading a bit more about it, you could try a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. He explains his beliefs on this subject. Not a hard book to follow, and will most likely give you a different perspective on things if you haven't read into the subject before. Corruption, incompetence and governments without the best interest of the nation at heart. Colonialism and whatnot did not cause our current suffering. All those deals that put Africa at a disadvantage are not forced on it, but African leaders take them because there is something in it for them. Source: Elam and Native African. My question is, why despite all this, were Rhodesia and apartheid South Africa the wealthiest countries on Africa? The reasons could never be fitted into an explain like I'm 5 answer in a good way. This is an absolutely huge topic with extremely many facets. You couldn't fit an adequate answer into a 5-page essay, let alone an explain like I'm 5 answer. Anything you will get here will be vastly inadequate and likely very biased, misinformed, one-sided opinions. This is a gross oversimplification of what you see in the modern world, but stability, prosperity. Even a nation not blessed with natural resources can prosper through tourism and industry if it's stable. Think Scandinavia, Switzerland, Taiwan, Singapore, Monaco, etc. Colonialism basically ended 50-60 years ago in most cases. Whilst some colonialism looking at you, Belgium was regressive and cruel. In most other cases in Africa it was quite benevolent and in many cases actually improved things. The problem Africa has is that basically, since the Africans began to manage their countries for themselves 50 years or so ago, corruption and mismanagement has been the order of the day. Don't believe me? Compare with Asia, where the same colonialism happened, but most countries there are now thriving economies. Some cultures thrive, others don't. Africa hasn't had a culture of scientific and technological pursuit that has allowed it to thrive and pursue industrialization the same way Europe has. And once you fall behind, all you can do is play catch up. That's why modern African states are simply relics of the colonial era, where bribery and corruption run rampant and the resources are being pilfered by unscrupulous foreign companies. Population growing faster than the economy. That's a contemporary problem. Africans' kingdoms used to be organized around selling slaves, which limited developments, until European outlawed slavery in most of the world, which was very damaging to African economies. Why build and innovate when you can survive by building a mud hut? In North, if you don't build a house and gather food and resources to heat yourself, you're gonna die. One theory is lack of navigable rivers from the ocean, which is necessary for trade transport of goods, which is necessary for civilizations to branch out and acquire new knowledge technology. They have one, the Nile, and the world's oldest, most advanced civilization sprung up there. When foreign powers colonize another area, certain people and families in that area become friendly with the colonizers and benefit to become rich and powerful, while the rest of the people in the area remain poor. This inequality usually stays in place even after the colonizers leave, resulting in certain families continuing to hold all the power and money, which makes it very difficult for true democracy to happen and causes corruption at various levels, meaning that tax money does not go into infrastructure, etc., that would benefit the society as a whole. Proximity to Europe, Spain, Portugal, England, etc., needed their resources before they knew they were valuable. Even today the world exploits Africa because they never developed infrastructure to capitalize on resource wealth. So many tropical and parasitic diseases, malaria, schistosomiasis, filariasis, etc., illness and disability impair every aspect of personal and societal development, from agriculture and the ability to produce enough calories for adequate nutrition, to income acquisition, education and political stability. Colonization. For one, large swathes of Africa's natural resources and people were divvied up between various empires and nations for much of the last 1,000 years. And it takes a long while to bounce back from that. You've gotten some good answers already, so I'll just add that there's a great episode of the podcast Stuff You Should Know that will help you understand this. Episode title is Should Rich Countries Cancel Poor Countries' Debt? It sheds a lot of light on this topic. They are exploited for resources and their leaders generally don't have the country's best interests in mind. When they do, they get help from the US because the leader is authoritarian or some bullshit and we need to bring them democracy. Example: Libya. Simplistically speaking, colonialism had and still sort of has its grip on everything that occurs on the continent. Most of the modern governments were initially formed to repress and crack down on dissent from native communities. And this distrust still continues to this day. Colonialism. The whole rest of the world divided up Africa and has been exploiting her for the natural resources. Hasn't really been able to develop some sort of stability because of this.